Everyone, welcome back to my channel. So for today's case I'm going to be talking to you about is the David and Catherine Birnie case. So David John Birnie, who was born on 16th of February 1951, who had died on 7th of October 2005, and Catherine Margaret Birnie Harrison, that was born on 23rd of May 1951, were an Australian couple who was from Perth, who had murdered 4 women at their home in 1986, also attempting to murder a 5th. These crimes were referred to the press as the Moorhouse murders, after the Birnies' address at 3 Moorhouse Street in Willoughby, a suburb of Perth. David Birnie was the oldest of 5 children and grew up in Wattlegrove, a semi-rural suburb of Perth. School friends and church acquaintances remember Birnie's family as having been very dysfunctional and subject to frequent rumours involving alcoholism, promiscuity and incest. The family never had a regular meal together, and the Birnie's parents did not cook meals for the children. In the early 1960s, Birnie's parents decided to move to the family to another Perth suburb, where he eventually met Catherine Harrison through some mutual friends. This was at age 15. He left school to become an apprentice jockey for Eric Parnham at the nearby Ascot racecourse. During his time there, Birnie had physically abused the horses and developed the habit of exhibitionism. One night, Birnie, wearing only stockings over his head, broke into a room of an elderly lady where he was boarding and attempted to rape her. By the time he was an adolescent, Birnie had been in and out of prison for several misdemeanors and felonies, and this was as an adult, and he became addicted to sex and pornography and was a paraphiliac. In his early 20s, he married his first wife and had a daughter, Tanya, who was aged 10 at the time of his arrest. Tanya, who has changed her surname since Birnie's capture, has never married and had no children, stating, quote, "I don't want to spawn another David Birnie." In late 1986, at the time of these murders, Birnie was employed at a car wrecker shop that was in Willoughby, a suburb of Perth. Catherine Birnie was born as Catherine Margaret Harrison on 23rd of May 1951. She was 2 years old when her mother Doreen died, giving birth to her brother, who himself died 2 days later. Unable to raise Catherine, her father Harold had then sent the girl to live with her marital grandparents. When she was aged 10, a custody dispute resulted in Harold regaining sole custody of Catherine. Catherine met David at age 12 and began a relationship with him just 2 years later. Her father pleaded with her on several occasions to leave David due to the fact that their involvement with him led her getting into a lot of trouble with the local police, resulting in her being sent to some youth prison during her adolescence. This offered Catherine a chance to break away from David, and it was encouraged by a parole officer. She began working for the McLaughlin family as a housekeeper, and she then went and married Donald McLaughlin on her 21st birthday and had 7 children. Their firstborn son was struck and killed by a car in infancy. In 1985, Catherine left her family and went to live with David. The couple were never legally married, but Catherine then changed her surname, and this was by deed poll, to Birnie. Over a period of 5 weeks, the Birnies abducted 5 women aged between 15 and 31. All of the victims, except for just one, were raped and murdered. The sole exception was the final victim, who escaped on the day after her abduction and led the police back to the Birnie house. Their crime spree. 22-year-old Mary Nielsen, a psychology student at the University of Western Australia and part-time delicatessen worker. She met David then at the car wrecker shop where he worked. David had then offered to sell cheap tyres for her car and subsequently gave her his phone number. On the 6th of October 1986, she went to the Birnie's house. She had been gagged, chained to the bed and raped by David, while Catherine had observed. She was then taken to Glen Eagle near Albany Highway in Bedfordale, where she was then raped again and strangled with a nylon cord. David had then stabbed her, thinking that it would be speeding up the decomposition, as he, quote, read that in a book somewhere. Catherine joined him in burying her into a shallow grave. She would have then received a degree for psychology for the university 1 year after her murder. 2 weeks after the murder of Nielsen, Susanna Candy, a 15-year-old high school student that was from Netherlands, was abducted while hitchhiking along Stirling Highway, and this was in Claremont. After her abduction, the Birnies forced Candy to send letters to her family to assure them that she was all right. The Birnies had been cruising for hours looking for a victim when they had spotted Candy. When she entered the car, she was held at knife point while her hands had been tied together. She was taken to 3 Moorhouse Street, where she had then been gagged, chained to the bed, and then raped by both David and Catherine. Afterward, after an abortive attempt to strangle the girl with the nylon cord, the Birnies then forced sleeping pills down Candy's throat. Once they took effect, David put the cord around Candy's neck and then told Catherine to prove her undying love for him by murdering the girl. Catherine complied with the kill her, while then David had watched. Candy was buried close to Nielsen's gravesite in Glen Eagle. When asked her later why she murdered Candy, Catherine had said, "Because I wanted to see how strong I was within my inner self. I didn't feel a thing. It was like I expected. I was prepared to follow him to the end of the earth and do anything to see that his desires were satisfied." She was a female. Females hurt and destroy males. On the 1st of November, the Birnies saw 31-year-old Nolene Patterson, and this was standing beside her car on Canning Highway. She had run out of fuel while on her way home from her job as a bar manager at the Nedlands Golf Club. Once inside the Birnies' car, Patterson was subdued and taken back to the Moorhouse Street, where David repeatedly raped her after she was confined to a bed. The Birnies originally decided to murder her the same night, but David kept her prisoner in the house for 3 days. Amid an apparent emotional attachment to Patterson, Catherine then became really jealous and made an ultimatum. David would have to kill Patterson or Catherine would have to kill herself. He immediately then forced an overdose of sleeping pills down Patterson's throat and then had strangled her while she slept. They took her body to Glen Eagle but buried it away from all of the others. Catherine reportedly got great pleasure from throwing the sand on Patterson's face. On 5th of November, the Birnies abducted 21-year-old Denise Brown from a bus stop on Stirling Highway. In the same fashion as the earlier victims, Brown was abducted at knife point and assaulted at the Moorhouse Street. The following afternoon, she had been taken to Wanneroo Pine Plantation, where in the seclusion of the forest that David raped Brown in the couple's car. While then they waited for the darkness. After dragging Brown from the car, David had then raped her again and stabbed her in the neck, convinced that the girl was actually dead. They had then dug a shallow grave and laid her body in it, but Brown sat up in the grave. David then grabbed the axe, struck her twice in the head, and then buried her again. On the 9th of November, 17-year-old Kate Moore had then been abducted at knife point after accepting a ride from the Birnies. David held the knife to her throat and forced her to ring her mother. Moore had then assured her mother that she had too much to drink and that she was staying at a friend's house, hoping that her mother would realize it was a ruse and then to call the frightened. Knowing that she was not a drinker, Moore later then stated that she asked them if they intended to kill or rape her and was informed, "We'll only rape you if you're good." She was forced to dance for them and slept in the couple's bed while handcuffed to David. After David went to work on the day following her capture, Catherine went to the front door to carry out a drug deal and then had forgot to chain Moore to the bed. Moore broke the lock of the nearby window and had climbed through, but hit her head on the concrete after knocking on various neighbours' doors. She jumped the gate and was attacked by David's dog. She ran into a nearby vacuum cleaner shop, informing the owner that she had been raped. She detailed her ordeal to the police, while some of the officers were initially skeptical of her story. 22-year-old Constable Laura Hancock believed her from the outset due to the amount of detail that she had provided, including the Birnie's address and telephone number. The Birnies had given themselves aliases, but Moore had then read David's name on a medicine bottle. Moore stated that had watched the film Rocky on a VHS and described a drawing that she had concealed in a house as proof of her presence. Subsequently, police found the drawing and the VHS copy of Rocky in the Birnie's VCR. David and Catherine was arrested, and during their interviews they gave some conflicting information. Catherine denied ever meeting Moore, and then while David insisted Moore had been to their house voluntarily to engage in consensual sex. Detective Sergeant Vince Katish then convinced David to confess and reveal where the previous victims had then been buried. There is speculation that the Birnies were responsible for the disappearance of Cheryl Renwick in May of 1986 and Barbara Weston in June 1986. It had also been suggested that David was responsible for the disappearance of Lisa Marie Mott in 1980. However, his first wife was accounted for his whereabouts on the day that Mott had disappeared. When sent to trial, David pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and 1 count of each abduction and rape. When asked why he had pleaded guilty, he gestured towards the victims' families and said, "It's the least I could do." He was sentenced to 4 terms of life imprisonment after being found sane enough to stand trial. Catherine was also sentenced to 4 terms of life imprisonment by the Supreme Court of Western Australia. Under law at the time, both were required to serve 20 years before being eligible for parole. Initially, David was held at the maximum security Fremantle prison and was soon moved to a solitary confinement to keep him coming to harm from other prisoners. 3 of the original death row cells were converted for him, and he stayed there until the prison was closed in 1991. The cell can occasionally be viewed on the True Crime Tour held daily at the Fremantle prison. While incarcerated, the Birnies exchanged more than 2,600 letters, but were not allowed any other form of contact. David was found dead in his cell at Casuarina Prison on 7th of October 2005 at 4:30 a.m. He was 54 years old, and an inquest found that he had hanged himself from an air vent that was using a length of cord. Various factors led to his suicide, and a failure to provide him with any antidepressants had exacerbated his depression. His computer had been confiscated, and he was suspected of sexually assaulting another prisoner. He was described by a former prison officer as a model prisoner who looked after injured animals. Catherine was not allowed to attend his funeral. Catherine is imprisoned in Bandy Women's Prison. Since being incarcerated, she has worked as a prison librarian and appeared in a prison production of Nuisance. In 2007, her parole application had been rejected, and then the Attorney General of Western Australia, Jim McGuinty, said that her release was unlikely while he remained in the office. Catherine's case was to be reviewed again in January 2010, and however, on 14th of March 2009, new Western Australian Attorney General Christian Porter, following some requests from the victims' families, determined that she was to stay in jail for life. This decision makes her the third Australian woman, after Catherine Knight and Patricia Byers, to have her papers marks never to be released. Her appeal of this decision was turned down in March 2010, and this was by Porter. Her fourth bid for parole was declined in 2016. The same year, Kate Moore had then begun a campaign to end Western Australian laws that automatically puts convicts up for parole every 3 years. Moore then has stated Birnie has never even applied for parole. In 2017, Catherine's youngest son, under the alias of Peter, called for her execution, stating that his relation to her has resulted in him being assaulted on multiple occasions. He also supports the MOORHOUSE campaigns. Okay then everyone, so that is today's case. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I see you all again next time. Take care.